In this video, we'll show you how to install a high-performance Rockford Fosgate audio system on this Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Welcome back. I'm Eric, and today we're going to install an HD14RGSG-STAGE3 on this Street Glide. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we have the bike flashed by an authorized Rockford Fosgate dealer. We have a list of dealers that can flash on our website. The factory radio contains an excessive EQ curve preset by the factory. Now this is fine for factory setups, but not with a high-performance aftermarket system like the one that we're going to install here. We need to get rid of that EQ curve, allowing you to experience the full potential of our audio system. We'll get started by removing the seat using a number 2 screwdriver and a 10mm socket to disconnect the battery negative. Okay, now that we're done with that, we're ready to remove our fairing. First, we'll install the service cover on our fender. Then, using a T27 Torx, we'll remove 4 bolts from the inside of the fairing and 3 that hold the visor in. Now this is best done with 2 people. One person to position and hold the fairing while the other person removes all the bolts. Then once you pull the fairing down, you'll disconnect any harnesses and remove it from the bike. Now we're ready to remove our speaker pods. We'll start by disconnecting the harnesses on top using a flathead screwdriver and plastic removal tool. Then we'll use a 5/32 ball head Allen to remove the top screws from the top of each pod. We'll move on down and remove the 3 bolts from the lower inside using a 7/16 socket with a swivel joint and extension. Now the brake side is difficult to get to, so we recommend detaching the lower harness panel with the number 1 Phillips to give you extra space. Finally, we'll use a 3/16 Allen driver to remove the 3 screws from each pod. Now we're ready to remove the factory equipment and install our new speakers. As you can see, when we removed the speaker pods, there were some additional harnesses that we had to remove. The TMS65 speakers included in your kit contain extra grills for road glide and tour pack installs. For our batwing fairing, we're going to use this grill with 3 tabs. We'll start by using a T25 Torx and remove 3 screws that hold the factory grill. We'll then use the same hardware to secure our new ones in place. Take note when installing that the logo will reside at the bottom. We'll use the same T25 to remove the 4 screws from the speaker pod and install the new speaker with the logo toward the bottom as well. After that's done, we'll use our 3/16 Allen driver to secure the 3 outer screws to hold the pods in place. Before we move on to the next step, we'll go ahead and finish attaching our speaker pods and reattach the wiring harnesses, including the lower harness panel. Once we're done with that, we'll start prepping for our amp bracket by removing these two harnesses and carefully relocating the satellite antenna. Now we're ready to install our amp bracket. First, using a T25 Torx driver, we'll remove these top 4 screws. Then, we'll stick on 4 included standoffs over the holes. Now, these are very important because it isolates the heat generated from the amplifier and preventing it from transferring to the other electronics. Then, we'll position the bracket with the heat sink fins facing the front. Using the supplied hardware and a 3mm Allen driver, secure the screws into the holes labeled 14+ Street Glide. Now that we're done with that, we're ready to tune our amplifier and install it. Now we offer a free amp tuning guide that's available in the description of this video and through this kit's product details page at rockfordfosgate.com. Once we get the amplifier configured, we'll secure it to the amp bracket using the supplied hardware and a 2.5mm Allen driver. Now before proceeding, be sure to remove the pre-installed power connector since the harness already has one. Now that we have that done, we're ready to remove the gas tank. We'll start off by disconnecting the electrical harness and pulling the 2 breather lines in the back. Note that they may be zip tied underneath. Next, we'll disconnect the gas line. Push up on the hose, and while sliding the fitting upward, pull down on the gas line. Now be ready to have a shop rag handy just in case you need to catch any excess fuel that's left in the line. Once that's done, detach the 2 rubber boots from both sides of the front of the gas tank. Then use a 1/2-inch socket and extension to remove those bolts. Then use the same socket and a smaller extension to remove the 2 bolts in the back. Now that we have access to our center channel, we're ready to install our power harness. First, cut any zip ties off and unsnap the center harness cover. Once that's done, we'll take the power connector side of our harness and run it up through the clutch side of the motorcycle. We'll then use a small Phillips driver to unscrew a plastic rivet that holds a retaining bracket in between the forks. We'll route our harness through this bracket and up to the amplifier. Make sure you have enough slack to make your amplifier and battery connections. Then simply plug in the power connector into the amplifier and plug the blue wire into an empty connector on the top of the brake side. This blue wire is the amplifier remote turn-on. Take note that there is likely an empty plug that needs to be removed before making this connection. If this plug is occupied with another accessory, relocate that accessory item to pull power from another connector. On our motorcycle, there's 2 located on the other side. Now that we're done with that, we're ready to install our bag lid speakers. We'll remove the bag lids by unscrewing the 2 quick release pins on the inside. Now, the Street Glide that we're working with here has some aftermarket taillights that we're also going to need to disconnect. Alright, we're ready to prepare our bag lids for speaker installation. We designed this template to assist you in making the perfect cut. To get started, we'll use some 3M blue masking tape to cover the top of the bag lid so we don't scratch the paint. Next, we'll position our template on top, making sure that the front lip of the template is sitting firmly against the ridge of the bag lid. Push on the corner, front, and top of the template to make sure it's properly positioned with no play around the lid. Then, mark the 2 pilot holes on top. Remove the template and use a 1/8-inch bit to pre-drill the holes. Then secure the template in place using a number 2 Phillips and the small screws provided in the kit. Now, we removed the bags to make it easier for you to see this process on camera. With our new template, It's actually easier to perform this task on the motorcycle and doesn't require you to remove any of the hardware. Now that we have that done, we're going to use a 5/16 bit to drill our pilot holes. Using a jigsaw with a fine-tooth blade, follow along the template while staying within the guides. To maintain accuracy, do not cut the segments of the template until all the slots have been cut. Now, cutting into the template itself will cause fitment issues, especially at the corners. Now, a wise installer once showed me a trick to use a bin liner inside the bag to catch all the debris. This will keep the interior nice and clean. Now that we have that done, we went ahead and cleaned up our cutouts, making sure that there's no burrs around the edges so that we could test fit our grill. So now we're ready to install the speakers. First, we'll open up the bag lid, then position the mounting ring and grill in place to make sure that they're properly aligned. The grill goes on the outside and our mounting ring on the inside. That's where we'll sandwich them together to the bag lid. Using a number 2 Phillips, secure 4 of the smaller screws supplied in the kit. Now be careful not to over tighten these. Once that's done, we'll align the speaker and the basket protector assembly with the speaker terminals toward the rear of the bike. Then secure it to the mounting ring from the inside using 4 long button head screws with the built-in washer. Now that we have both speakers installed, we're ready to wire them. First, remove both bags and service covers. Then, route the bag lid speaker harness up through the same retaining bracket that we originally used for our power wire. Then pull the harness up to the amplifier and verify there's enough slack for connection to the amp's rear output. Then, route the opposite ends of the harness through the center channel and rest them near the battery. Okay. You'll notice we removed both service panels so we could run our harness under the seat frame back to the rear bag area. Our harness is labeled brake side and clutch side. The brake side can easily route through the service panel and exit toward the rear shock. On the clutch side, we'll use a 1/2-inch socket to slightly pull out the fuse panel and route our harness behind there toward the rear belt. Now that we have our harness laid out, we're ready to drill our holes into the bags. Now, we're measuring approximately 3.5 inches down from the front of the bag's quick release. On our motorcycle, it ensures that the harness is kept away from any moving parts. Now, on your bike, this may vary slightly based on the belt on the clutch side and the brake calipers on the right side. We'll need a 3/4 inch hole for installation of the grommet. To get the hole started, we'll be using a drill bit, then switching to a step-up bit to increase the hole to the appropriate size. Alright, now we're ready to wire our bag lids. To get started, we'll position our bag in place and insert the grommet into the 3/4 inch hole. Once you have the grommet seated, finish securing the bag into place. Once that's done, use the pigtail harness included in the kit and connect the red wire to the positive terminal that's marked with the red dot and the black wire to the negative terminal. Then plug the pigtail into the main harness. Now, we've included zip ties, zip tie mounts, and retainer clips to help keep your wiring out of the way while it's inside the bag. We've also included some replacement caution stickers for replacement in the bag as well. Now we're ready to install our T-harness. This is an all-new design with some cool features. First, we'll disconnect the main harness from the back of the factory source unit. Push the little catch pin that locks the harness in place and slide the lever open. Plug this end into the female end of our T-harness and lock it into place. Then, Plug the male end of our harness into the source unit and slide the lever until you hear it click. Take the harness labeled amp input and connect them to the corresponding left and right input jacks on the amplifier. Then take the harness labeled amp output and connect the front to the corresponding front amp output. Then take our rear speaker harness from the bag lids and connect it to the rear amp output. Since we're not using the harness labeled rear from our main harness, we'll just zip tie it out of the way. Now that we have that done, we're ready to make our battery connections. We'll use a 1/2 inch socket to remove 2 screws that hold the engine control module in place. We'll disconnect a couple harnesses and flip the ECM tray up to make our positive terminal connection. Then we'll reconnect our negative cable with our amp ground. Once that's done, we'll put everything back in place. Alright, now that we have that done, we'll clean up our wiring. In the back, we'll need to pull our bag lid harnesses to remove any slack and zip tie them into place. This is to prevent any wiring from interfering with the suspension, drive belt, or brake calipers. Now, in the front, you'll notice we have some extra wires on our T-harness, as well as supplied in the kit. These extra harnesses allow you to use our DSR1 digital signal processor. For more information, download our DSR1 setup guide for Harley-Davidson and keep an eye out for a complete configuration video we'll be releasing in the future. Now that we have everything cleaned up, we're ready to reassemble the bike. You'll notice that there are some additional adapters that come with your kit. In the current configuration that you see here, supports a rear bag lid system. Now, these additional Y adapters allow you to add a tour pack system and aftermarket lowers to the front. There's also an extra bracket, hardware, and bypass plugs that are not used on this motorcycle but are covered in other videos. Alright, now that we have the bike reassembled, we're ready to test the system. I want to reiterate before doing this, make sure that the factory radio is flashed. Now we get a lot of questions about maintenance on the system, and since the speakers are element ready, they can actually get wet. However, when washing the bike, close the vent to prevent water from getting inside the fairing. This will protect your amplifier and all your electrical components. As you can see, that install was pretty straightforward. If you prefer to have a professional do the install for you, we have a network of authorized Rockford Fosgate dealers that can be found on our website. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact our technical support. They can be reached Monday through Friday at 1-800-669-9899 or through live chat at the bottom of our website at rockfordfosgate.com. Until next time, I'm Eric. We'll see you again soon.